They called her Paperwork Girl and treated her like a ghost. For 6 months, she silently endured their mockery while fixing their mistakes and doing the work no one else wanted. They never wondered why someone with her skills accepted such treatment. They never questioned why she documented everything. They never noticed her watching. But everyone in that Pentagon briefing room noticed when the 4-star general walked past the senior officers, stood at her desk, and snapped a crisp salute. In that moment, everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of hidden strength and unexpected recognition, subscribe for more moments of quiet redemption. The fluorescent lights hummed to life one by one, casting a sterile glow across the Pentagon's Intelligence Analysis Division. It was 6:15 a.m., and Reverie Blackwood was already at her desk, methodically sorting through a stack of classified documents. Her desk stood against the back wall, positioned in a way that made her almost invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for her, just the way she preferred it. The first analysts began trickling in at 6:45, gathering in small clusters near the coffee station. None acknowledged Reverie's presence. She didn't look up from her work, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency as she organized intelligence reports from 3 different Middle Eastern countries. Lieutenant Wexler arrived at 7:02, his uniform pressed but his expression smug as he strode through the office. He stopped to chat with 2 junior analysts, laughing loudly about some weekend conquest. When he needed to pass Reverie's desk to reach the printer, he brushed past without a word, bumping her chair hard enough to jolt her hand mid-signature. No apology came, none was expected. By 7:30, the office buzzed with activity. Senior analyst Braddock entered, his silver hair meticulously combed, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room straightened as he distributed the morning's high-priority assignments. "Jenkins, I need the Syrian border activity report by noon," Braddock said, handing over a tablet. "Wexler, you're on the Kurdish intelligence intercepts. Pharaoh, the nuclear facility satellite analysis needs your eyes." He continued around the room, assigning critical intelligence work to each analyst. When he finally reached Reverie's desk, he didn't make eye contact. "These need filing," he said, dropping a heavy stack of papers beside her keyboard. "And clean up the conference room after the 0800 briefing." The deputy director left coffee rings on the table again. Reverie nodded once. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, almost inaudible. As Braddock walked away, Lieutenant Wexler smirked in her direction. "Busy day for Paperwork Girl," he stage whispered to Jenkins, who snickered in response. At precisely 8:00 a.m., the morning intelligence briefing began. The conference room had exactly 12 chairs around the oval table. 13 people attended. Reverie stood in the back corner, notebook in hand, as Commander Pharaoh presented the overnight developments in Eastern Europe. "Satellite imagery confirms Russian troop movements have accelerated near the Ukrainian border," Pharaoh said, clicking through slides. "We're seeing approximately 15,000 troops, possibly preparing for exercises, though timing suggests the count is 70 to 800, Reverie said quietly. The room fell silent. All heads turned toward the woman in the corner. Commander Pharaoh's expression darkened. "Excuse me?" The satellite pass at 0400 showed 17,800 troops, not 15,000, Reverie repeated, her tone neutral. "And the staging area suggests urban infiltration training, not standard exercises." Pharaoh stared at her for a long moment before checking his tablet. His jaw tightened. "It appears I was looking at yesterday's numbers," he said stiffly. "The count is indeed 17 to 800. And yes, urban infiltration seems likely." He continued the briefing without acknowledging Reverie's correction further. When the meeting concluded, Reverie stayed behind, wiping coffee rings from the table's polished surface while the others filed out. Through the glass wall, she saw Pharaoh updating Braddock, gesturing to his tablet. Braddock nodded, impressed. Neither looked in her direction. Back at her desk, Reverie began processing the stack of papers Braddock had left her. Most were routine intelligence logs that needed archiving. Seemingly mundane work, but each document contained fragments of information about ongoing operations, potential threats, and intelligence sources. As she worked, her eyes caught patterns and connections that others might miss. A secure phone on her desk, different from the standard desk phones others had, vibrated once. Reverie picked it up on the first ring. "Confirmed," she said simply, then listened for exactly 17 seconds before hanging up. No one in the busy office noticed the call. At 10:22 a.m., Lieutenant Wexler approached her desk, coffee mug in hand. "Hey, paperwork girl, where would I find the classified logs for Operation Copperbell?" he asked, not bothering to use her name. Reverie looked up, her expression revealing nothing. "Section C, Cabinet 3, third drawer from the bottom. You'll need level 4 clearance to access it." Wexler frowned. "I only have level 3. "Then you'll need authorization from Commander Farrow or Analyst Braddock," she replied, turning back to her work. "That's ridiculous," Wexler muttered. "I need that intel for my Kurdish analysis." Reverie didn't respond. Rules were rules. As Wexler turned to leave, his elbow caught his coffee mug, sending dark liquid cascading across Reverie's meticulous piles of paperwork. The hot coffee soaked through multiple classified documents before she could react. "Shit. Sorry about that," Wexler said, though his tone suggested minimal concern. He grabbed a few tissues from a nearby desk and haphazardly dabbed at the spill. "You can just reprint these, right?" Reverie looked at the ruined documents, then back to Wexler. "Some of these are original signed orders. They can't be reprinted." Wexler shrugged. "Well, figure something out. That's what you're here for, right?" He walked away, already focused on finding Commander Farrow for the authorization he needed. With careful precision, Reverie salvaged what documents she could, using her desk fan to dry others. As she reached for a particularly saturated paper, her sleeve pulled back, revealing a jagged scar running along her wrist. It wasn't the kind of scar that came from an accident. It looked deliberate, perhaps the result of restraints or combat. Jenkins, passing by, caught a glimpse and did a double take, but Reverie quickly adjusted her sleeve and continued working. At 11:45, the office began preparing for an afternoon visit from officials at the State Department. Analysts rushed to update their reports, commanders reviewed presentation materials, and the general energy of the room intensified. Amid the controlled chaos, Major Hayes approached Reverie's desk. "Ms. Blackwood," he said, one of the few who bothered to use her name, "I need the intelligence summaries from the Damascus intercepts." Something in his tone made Reverie look up and study him carefully. Hayes was relatively new to the division, having transferred in about 2 months ago. He worked primarily on Middle Eastern intelligence, specializing in Syrian operations. "Those were classified under special access protocols last week," she responded. "They are no longer in general circulation." Hayes's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm aware. I have clearance." He placed a form on her desk with authorization codes. Reverie examined the form. Everything appeared in order, yet she hesitated. "I'll need to verify this with Director's Office. Protocol for special access changes." Hayes leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't have time for additional red tape. The State Department meeting is in 2 hours, and I need those intercepts for my briefing." "I understand, sir," Reverie said, her tone apologetic but firm. "It will only take a moment to verify." As Hayes waited, visibly impatient, Reverie made a call to an extension few in the office ever used. After a brief exchange, she hung up and turned to Hayes. "You've been granted one-time access. The files are in the secure reading room. You can't remove them, but you can take notes for your briefing." Hayes nodded curtly and left. As soon as he was out of sight, Reverie made another entry in her small black notebook, recording the time, the request, and Hayes's authorization code. The afternoon progressed with Reverie continuing her seemingly menial tasks, filing, organizing, correcting reports that others had prepared too hastily. When analysts couldn't locate critical information, they came to her. When systems needed accessing, somehow she had the right clearance codes, yet no one, seemed to notice this contradiction. How could the office paperwork girl consistently have access to the Pentagon's most sensitive systems? At 2:30 p.m., Reverie needed to enter the building's most secure area to deliver updated intelligence briefings. Unlike other staff members who underwent thorough ID checks and biometric scans, the guard simply nodded as she approached, pressing his thumb to a hidden scanner that bypassed the standard protocols. No words were exchanged. Inside the secure area, Reverie moved with purpose, delivering the updated intelligence packets to various offices. As she placed one on a general's desk, a photograph slipped from between her notebook pages, landing face up on the floor. The image showed 5 soldiers in desert combat gear, faces obscured by tactical gear, standing before what appeared to be a cave entrance in mountainous terrain. She quickly retrieved it, tucking it back into her notebook before anyone could notice. By 4 p.m., the State Department officials had come and gone. The briefing had proceeded without incident, though Reverie had noticed several inaccuracies in Major Hayes's presentation that contradicted the Damascus intercepts he had reviewed earlier. She recorded these discrepancies in her notebook. The office began to quiet as analysts wrapped up their work for the day. Commander Farrow approached Reverie's desk with a stack of papers. "I need these corrections implemented in the Eastern Europe assessment before tomorrow's briefing," he said, placing them beside her. Reverie glanced at the papers. They were her corrections, the same ones she had noted during the morning meeting and submitted through proper channels hours ago. Farrow had simply repackaged them as his own insights. "Of course, sir," she replied, knowing that tomorrow Farrow would present these findings as his own work. As the office emptied, unusual activity on one of the intelligence networks caught Reverie's attention. Someone had accessed the secure database containing personnel files for deep cover operatives in the Middle East, specifically those involved in Operation Shadowfall, a highly classified mission that had gone catastrophically wrong 3 months ago. The access had come from within the building, from a terminal registered to the Intelligence Analysis Division. Reverie checked the log. The user ID belonged to a junior analyst who had left for the day over an hour ago. She glanced around the now quiet office. Only a few people remained. Jenkins finishing reports, Wexler chatting with security at the entrance, and Major Hayes in his office, visible through the glass partition. As if sensing her gaze, Hayes looked up, making direct eye contact with Reverie. His expression was unreadable. He held her gaze for 3 seconds before deliberately turning back to his computer. Reverie's secure phone vibrated again. She answered with the same one-word response. "Confirmed." The voice on the other end spoke for exactly 12 seconds. "Understood," Reverie replied, then ended the call. With methodical calm, she began organizing her desk for the night, placing certain files in precise positions, angling her computer screen slightly, and ensuring her notebook was secure in her drawer. As she reached for her coat, a priority alert appeared on her screen. "General Marshall, arrival scheduled, AO 800 tomorrow. General Samuel Marshall, 4-star general and head of Special Operations Command." His visits to the Intelligence Analysis Division were rare and always significant. As Reverie prepared to leave, she noticed Hayes watching her again. This time, his observation was more subtle, a sidelong glance as he spoke on his phone. She pretended not to notice, gathering her belongings with the same efficiency she applied to everything. The night security guard nodded to her as she exited. "Night, Ms. Blackwood." "Good night, Eric," she replied softly. Once outside in the parking garage, Reverie walked to her modest sedan, a vehicle so nondescript it practically vanished among the others. Before getting in, she scanned the area carefully, noting each camera, each potential vantage point. Only then did she open her car door. Inside, she sat motionless for exactly 60 seconds before starting the engine. As she drove toward the exit, she noticed Major Hayes hurrying to his car, phone still pressed to his ear. His expression was tense. Instead of turning left toward her apartment, Reverie drove to a small coffee shop 20 minutes from the Pentagon. She ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner table with clear views of both the entrance and the emergency exit. For 30 minutes, she sipped her coffee and made occasional notes in a different notebook than the one she used at work. When her phone vibrated, she answered immediately. "Is it confirmed?" she asked, her voice now sharper, more authoritative than the meek tone she used at the office. After listening briefly, she nodded. "Prepare for extraction protocol. I'll be making the final confirmation tomorrow." As she drove home, Reverie's mind worked through the patterns she had observed over the past 6 months. The unauthorized access to classified systems, the discrepancies in intelligence reports, the subtle redirecting of resources away from certain operations, the unusual communications through supposedly secure channels. And always, at the center of these anomalies, Major Hayes. In her apartment, sparsely furnished with minimal personal effects, Reverie unlocked a hidden compartment in her closet and retrieved a secured laptop. After entering a 16-digit code, she connected a thumb drive and downloaded several files from the Pentagon's secure network, including Major Hayes's complete personnel file. The file showed an exemplary record: West Point graduate, multiple combat deployments, rapid advancement through the ranks, commendations for intelligence work in Syria and Iraq. On paper, Hayes was the model, military intelligence officer. But Reverie knew better. The patterns were there if you knew where to look. The inconsistencies, the unexplained absences, the convenient transfers that coincided with intelligence breaches. She sent an encrypted message through a channel not connected to any Pentagon systems. Pattern confirmed, asset compromised, extraction protocol ready. The reply came almost instantly. Phoenix confirmed for 0800 tomorrow. Reverie closed the laptop and returned it to its hiding place. Tomorrow would change everything. 6 months of invisibility, of enduring dismissal and disrespect, would culminate in one critical moment. As she prepared for bed, she removed the photo she had nearly dropped earlier from her notebook. Now, in the privacy of her apartment, she allowed herself to look at it fully. 5 soldiers in desert combat gear, herself among them, her team, her family. 3 of them were now dead, killed in an operation that had been compromised from within. Reverie placed the photo beside her bed and closed her eyes, mentally preparing for tomorrow's confrontation. For 6 months, she had been paperwork girl, invisible to those who should have seen her. Tomorrow, they would finally understand exactly who had been sitting among them all along. If you've ever been underestimated or overlooked when you knew your true value, share your story in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone quiet finally receive the recognition they deserved? Subscribe to see the shocking conclusion to Reverie's mission and discover what happens when her true identity is finally revealed. Morning light filtered through the high windows of the Pentagon's Intelligence Analysis Division as analysts gathered for the daily briefing. The room hummed with anticipation, not for the intelligence updates, but for the impending visit from General Marshall later that morning. Officers straightened their uniforms while analysts polished their presentations, everyone seeking visibility for career advancement. Everyone except Reverie Blackwood. She sat in the back corner of the briefing room, black notebook open, pen poised to capture details others would miss. Major Hayes stood at the front, clicking through satellite images of a Syrian compound. Intelligence suggests increased activity at this location over the past 72 hours, Hayes explained, pointing to a cluster of buildings. We've identified 3 high-value targets moving through the area, possibly planning a coordinated operation against American interests. Reverie studied the images carefully. The timestamps had been altered. The satellite pass showed a date from last week, not the live intelligence Hayes claimed it to be. More concerning was what the images actually showed, not enemy combatants planning attacks, but the safe house where American operatives had been stationed until recently. Hayes continued, "Based on this intelligence, I recommend shifting surveillance, resources from the northern border to focus on this compound. Such a shift would leave the actual location of terrorist activity unwatched." Reverie made a careful note, recording both the deception and its potential consequences. When the briefing concluded, Senior Analyst Braddock approached Hayes with obvious approval. "Excellent work, Major. I'll implement your recommendations immediately." Lieutenant Wexler, eager to align himself with Hayes's rising influence, joined them. "Sir, I'd be happy to coordinate the resource reallocation." Neither man noticed Reverie still sitting in the corner, documenting their conversation. As the room emptied, she remained, appearing to organize her notes while actually photographing Hayes's presentation, slides with a micro camera disguised as a pen. Braddock finally noticed her lingering presence. "Blackwood, don't you have filing to do? And the conference room needs preparing for General Marshall's visit." "Yes, sir," she replied, closing her notebook. "I'll take care of it right away." As she headed toward her desk, Reverie's secure phone vibrated. She ducked into the women's restroom, checking each stall before answering. "Blackwood," she said, her voice now crisp and commanding, completely unlike her office persona. The bathroom door began to open. Instantly, Reverie switched to fluent Farsi, continuing her conversation while pretending to apply lipstick in the mirror. Lieutenant Jenkins entered, gave Reverie a curious glance, then proceeded to a stall. Reverie continued in Farsi, discussing extraction protocols and evidence documentation while maintaining the appearance of a casual personal call. When Jenkins emerged from the stall, Reverie switched to English. "Yes, I'll pick up milk on the way home," she said, reverting to her meek office voice before ending the call. Jenkins washed her hands, watching Reverie in the mirror. "I didn't know you spoke another language." "Just basics," Reverie demurred. "My grandmother was from Iran." Jenkins seemed unconvinced but didn't pursue it further. As they exited the restroom together, Colonel Winters from the Joint Special Operations Command was walking past. His eyes locked with Reverie's for a brief moment, recognition flashing across his face before he caught himself. "Ma'am," he said with a slight nod that conveyed more respect than anyone in the intelligence division had shown her in months. Jenkins noticed the exchange with confusion. "Do you know Colonel Winters?" "No," Reverie said simply. "He must have mistaken me for someone else." At her desk, Reverie began preparing for General Marshall's visit, methodically organizing intelligence portfolios while simultaneously monitoring Major Hayes's activities. He'd been making calls from his office, blinds partially closed, expression tense. When accessing the central database to retrieve the latest threat assessments, Reverie's clearance level momentarily displayed on the screen. Ultraviolet, ISISIO, classification level that existed above top secret, granted only to those involved in the military's most sensitive black operations. The designation flickered for only a second, before reverting to the standard clearance level assigned to administrative personnel. Lieutenant Wexler, passing behind her desk, paused. "Did I just see?" "System glitch," Reverie said without looking up. "Happens sometimes with the older terminals." Wexler frowned, clearly skeptical, but continued toward Hayes's office, where the two spoke in hushed tones. At 10:30 a.m., a building-wide evacuation drill sent personnel filing toward designated exits. Reverie moved with the crowd, but carefully observed security protocols others ignored, checking that secure systems were properly locked, noting which officers failed to secure classified materials in their haste, identifying which cameras continued operating during emergency protocols. As they stood in the designated assembly area outside, Reverie caught her reflection in a glass door. For a brief moment, her carefully maintained facade slipped, revealing a hardened expression that belonged more to a battlefield commander than an administrative assistant. Alert eyes scanning for threats, jaw set with determination, posture ready for action. Commander Farrow noticed the change. "Everything all right, Blackwood?" Immediately, Reverie's shoulders hunched slightly, her expression softening into practiced meekness. "Yes, sir. Just concerned about the files I left open." "Always the paperwork," Farrow said dismissively, turning his attention back to his phone. When they returned to the office, an urgent news alert played on the division's monitors. "Breaking: American intelligence operation compromised in Syria. Multiple casualties reported." Conversations halted as images of a destroyed compound, the same one from Hayes's morning briefing, appeared on screen. Reverie's hand trembled slightly, the only outward sign of her emotional response. That compound had housed her former team members, operatives she had personally trained and led before her current assignment. Hayes watched the broadcast with an unreadable expression before retreating to his office and closing the blinds completely. Using the distraction of the news alert, Reverie accessed the satellite imagery archives through her secure terminal. The actual footage confirmed her suspicions. The compound had been under surveillance for weeks, with information about its security protocols steadily extracted through Pentagon systems. Someone had been feeding critical intelligence to the enemy, resulting in a perfectly timed strike against American operatives. As she downloaded evidence of the security breach, a shadow fell across her desk. Hayes stood there, watching her with calculated intensity. "Interesting work for an administrative assistant," he said quietly. "Just updating the incident log, sir," Reverie replied, her screen already switched to a mundane spreadsheet. "Standard protocol after any operational compromise." "Is it?" Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, Ms. Blackwood, why were you in the secure archives at 21:30 last night?" The question was a trap. The archives required special access codes that someone of her apparent position shouldn't possess. If she admitted to being there, she would reveal her cover. If she denied it, Hayes would know she was lying. "I was delivering updated security protocols to Director Harmon," she answered smoothly. "He often works late. You can verify with his office." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "I believe I will." He turned to leave, but paused. "General Marshall's visit has everyone on edge. Important people don't come to our division without good reason." "I'm sure you're right, sir," Reverie replied, her eyes downcast, as if intimidated by the conversation. Once Hayes left, Reverie opened her desk drawer, removing a small photograph. With deliberate care, she positioned it at the corner of her desk, the same dessert photograph that had nearly fallen from her notebook the previous day, but this time clearly visible. It showed her with her combat team, their faces partially obscured, but recognizable to anyone who knew them. At precisely 11:45, Hayes walked past her desk again. His steps faltered as he noticed the photograph, his expression flickering between confusion and growing suspicion. Before he could comment, Reverie was called away by Braddock. When she returned minutes later, the photograph was gone. She had expected this. The hidden camera she'd installed beneath her desk would have captured Hayes taking the photo, providing further evidence of his interest in her team. Throughout the afternoon, Reverie methodically planted misinformation in files she knew Hayes would access. Slight alterations to coordinates, modified timestamps, intentional errors in operational details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the actual missions would recognize as incorrect. Each change was designed to reveal whether Hayes was transmitting information outside secure channels. The division buzzed with preparations for General Marshall's visit the following morning. Hushed conversations between Braddock and Hayes about the audit coming tomorrow reached Reverie's enhanced listening device, disguised as a standard office supply on her desk. "This isn't a routine visit," Braddock said tensely. "Marshall doesn't leave Special Operations Command unless something significant is happening." "Could be routine oversight," Hayes suggested, though his tone betrayed his own concern. "The Syrian operation failure would trigger standard review protocols." "No, this is different," Braddock insisted. "My contact at the Pentagon says he's bringing a security team. They're checking for something specific." During the afternoon security briefing, Wexler was assigned to present the Kurdish intelligence updates, the same assignment that had led to him spilling coffee on Reverie's documents the day before. When he fumbled key details, Braddock interrupted. "Lieutenant, this is unacceptable preparation for the General's visit. Get Blackwood to help you organize this data properly." Wexler's face flushed with humiliation at being assigned to work with Paperwork Girl. When the briefing ended, he approached Reverie's desk with barely contained resentment. "Apparently I need your help," he said, dropping a file beside her keyboard. "Braddock wants this reorganized by 1700. "Of course," Reverie replied. As she opened the file, she immediately noticed that her access to certain intelligence databases had been revoked. She looked up at Wexler, who couldn't quite hide his smirk. "Having trouble?" he asked innocently. "I might have adjusted your system permissions. Administrative error, I'm sure." "I see," Reverie said quietly. She had anticipated this move. "I'll work with what I have." While reorganizing Wexler's intelligence report, Reverie discovered that her secure communications line had been compromised. Someone had installed monitoring software on her terminal, sophisticated enough that most wouldn't detect it. But Reverie wasn't most people. Rather than remove it, she began using the compromised system to her advantage, sending carefully crafted messages that would appear significant to anyone monitoring. Meanwhile, she continued her actual communications through alternative means, using the microchip embedded in her seemingly ordinary watch. As evening approached, security footage from the building's east entrance showed someone accessing restricted files at 2:13 a.m. the previous night. The figure wore a maintenance uniform, face carefully angled away from cameras, but their height and build matched Major Hayes. Reverie saved a copy of the footage to her secure drive. Most of the division had departed when Reverie's direct line rang. The caller ID displayed General Marshall's office. "This is Blackwood," she answered, conscious of Hayes watching from his office. "Status update," came the crisp reply. "Preparations complete. All materials will be available as requested. Confirmed. 0800 tomorrow." The call ended. Reverie began gathering her belongings, aware that this brief exchange would provoke Hayes's curiosity. As predicted, he emerged from his office, approaching her desk with forced casualness. "Working late again?" he asked. "Final preparations for tomorrow's visit," she replied. "General Marshall seems to have specific interests in our division," Hayes commented. "Any insight into what he's looking for?" The question was too direct, too probing. Hayes was fishing for information, concerned about what the general might discover. "I wouldn't know, sir," Reverie said. "I just organized the briefing materials." Hayes studied her face, searching for deception. You know, you look familiar. Have we worked together before? Perhaps in another division. I don't believe so, sir. Strange, he continued. I could swear I've seen your face somewhere else. Reverie maintained her neutral expression. I have one of those faces, I suppose. Hayes didn't seem convinced. Well, have a good evening, Ms. Blackwood. Tomorrow will be interesting. After he left, Reverie remained at her desk, continuing her preparations while monitoring Hayes through the office security system she had quietly gained access to months ago. At 19:22, he received a call that visibly agitated him. He immediately gathered several files and left the building. Reverie followed at a safe distance, tracking him to the Pentagon parking garage where he met with an unidentified figure in a diplomatic vehicle with foreign plates. The exchange was brief. Documents passed, words exchanged, a nod of confirmation. When Hayes returned to the building 30 minutes later, Reverie was waiting in the shadows of the corridor leading to the intelligence division. As he approached his office, she deliberately walked past, startling him. Ms. Blackwood, he said, clearly surprised. I thought you'd left. Forgot my phone, she explained, holding up the device. You're working late as well. Hayes clutched his briefcase tighter. Last-minute preparations. The general's visit has everyone working overtime. Of course, she said with a small smile. Have a good night, Major. The tension between them was palpable, both aware that something significant was unfolding, neither willing to acknowledge it directly. After Hayes finally left for the night, Reverie enacted the next phase of her plan. In the empty office, she accessed Hayes's computer, using override codes that only someone with her actual security clearance could possess. Within minutes, she had copied his recent communications, documented his unauthorized file access, and planted the final piece of misinformation that would confirm his betrayal if transmitted. When she returned to her apartment that night, Reverie found evidence that someone had been there, subtle signs that would be imperceptible to most, but obvious to someone with her training. Nothing was missing or visibly disturbed, but the intrusion was clear. The micro-thin thread she had placed across her doorframe had been broken. The position of her kitchen chair was off by exactly 2 centimeters. They were looking for evidence of who she really was. Instead of alarm, Reverie felt satisfaction. Their increasing desperation confirmed that her mission was approaching its conclusion. She activated her secure communication device. Perimeter breached as anticipated, she reported. Final confirmation obtained. Subject transmitted altered intelligence to foreign contact at 1937. Understood, came the response. Phoenix Protocol authorized for 0800. Reverie spent the night reviewing every piece of evidence she had gathered over 6 months of deep cover work. The pattern was unmistakable. Major Hayes had been systematically compromising American intelligence operations, resulting in the deaths of multiple operatives, including members of her former team in Damascus. Tomorrow, it would end. Morning arrived with tense anticipation permeating the intelligence division. Analysts and officers arrived earlier than usual, uniforms perfectly pressed, workstations immaculate. Braddock paced the main floor, occasionally barking orders about presentation materials and intelligence updates. Unlike her colleagues, Reverie arrived in the same unassuming blazer and skirt she wore every day, her hair pulled back in its usual simple style. She took her position at the back wall desk, appearing to focus on routine paperwork while actually monitoring every movement within the division. At 07:45, Hayes entered, his usual confidence visibly strained. He immediately approached Wexler, speaking in hushed tones. Reverie activated her listening device. Any update on the system audit? Hayes asked. Nothing yet, Wexler replied, but security protocols have been elevated. There are special forces operators positioning throughout the building. Hayes's expression tightened. Where? Main entrances, security checkpoints, and outside the secure conference rooms. They're not regular security. These guys are different. Keep me posted, Hayes ordered, retreating to his office. At 07:52, Reverie received a text message. Phoenix inbound. She deleted it immediately, then continued with her paperwork, outwardly calm while her senses heightened to combat readiness. By 07:58, the entire division had assembled in the main briefing room. Reverie positioned herself at the back, clipboard in hand, apparently ready to take notes. In reality, her posture provided optimal visibility of both Hayes and all possible exits. Security officers outside the elevators stood straighter as the indicator showed the car descending from the executive level. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the doors. At precisely 08 Auxerre, the elevator arrived. The doors slid open, revealing General Samuel Marshall, a commanding figure with silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had led soldiers in combat for decades. He was accompanied by 4 aides, each carrying briefcases with secure locks. The room snapped to attention, everyone standing rigidly as the general entered. Everyone except Reverie, who remained seated at her desk, apparently absorbed in organizing documents. General Marshall scanned the assembled officers, acknowledging senior staff with brief nods. Commander Farrow stepped forward, hand extended. "General Marshall, sir, we're honored by your visit. We've prepared a comprehensive briefing on the Syrian situation and—" Marshall cut him off with a raised hand. "Thank you, Commander. That won't be necessary." Confusion rippled through the room as the general walked past Farrow, past Braddock, past the senior intelligence officers positioned prominently for recognition. He walked directly through the center of the briefing room, his focus apparently fixed on something beyond the gathered personnel. Officers exchanged bewildered glances as Marshall continued toward the back of the room, toward the administrative section, toward Reverie's desk. Major Hayes's expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization, his face paling visibly as he watched the general's path. The room fell completely silent as General Marshall stopped directly in front of Reverie's desk. She continued working for 3 measured seconds before slowly raising her eyes to meet his. What happened next stunned everyone present. General Marshall, 4-star general, head of Special Operations Command, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military, drew himself to his full height and snapped a perfect formal salute. "Permission to speak freely, Commander Blackwood?" The collective shock was palpable. Officers' eyes widened, jaws dropped, and whispers erupted across the room. Wexler actually took a step backward, bumping into Braddock, who stood frozen in disbelief. Reverie stood slowly, her transformation immediate and stunning. Her shoulders straightened, her posture shifted from administrative assistant to military commander in one fluid motion. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to giving orders that determined life or death. "At ease, General," she said, returning his salute with precision. "It's been a while." Across the room, Major Hayes began inching toward the side exit, his hand slipping inside his jacket. Reverie's eyes flicked to him for a fraction of a second, long enough for him to know she saw his movement, short enough that no one else would notice. General Marshall extended a secure tablet toward her. "Operation Shadowfall extraction complete. Your intelligence led to the capture of 3 key targets and recovery of all compromised assets." Reverie accepted the tablet, scanning the information displayed. "And the internal breach?" Marshall's eyes briefly shifted toward Hayes. "Target identified and contained as of US-600 this morning. Your mission is complete, Commander." Have you ever witnessed the moment when someone's true identity is finally revealed? When the person everyone underestimated suddenly shows their true power? Comment below with your stories of unexpected revelations, and subscribe to see the final confrontation between Commander Blackwood and the traitor who killed her team. The Intelligence Analysis Division froze in collective shock, the room suspended in a moment that would forever divide their understanding of who had been working among them. Commander Reverie Blackwood stood at full attention, no longer the invisible paperwork girl, but revealed as a decorated military intelligence officer whose true rank outclassed most people in the room. Major Hayes continued his subtle movement toward the side exit, his fingers still inside his jacket. Without taking her eyes off General Marshall, Reverie spoke with calm authority. "Lieutenant Wexler, Major Hayes is not authorized to leave this briefing." Wexler blinked in confusion, processing the transformation happening before him. His gaze darted between Reverie, no, Commander Blackwood, and Major Hayes, whose face had drained of color. "Yes, Commander," Wexler replied, reflexively responding to the authority in her voice. He moved to block Hayes's path to the exit. Reverie's eyes swept the room, cataloging the expressions of shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension. For 6 months, these people had walked past her, dismissed her, even mockingly called her paperwork girl. Now they stood frozen, struggling to reconcile their perception with the reality standing before them. Marshall handed Reverie a slim folder bearing presidential seals. By presidential authority, your official reinstatement to active Special Operations Command, effective immediately. Reverie accepted the folder with a crisp nod. Around the room, officers and analysts struggled to reconcile the administrative assistant they'd dismissed for months with the commanding officer now standing before them. Junior analysts whispered to each other, trying to process what was happening. Senior officers maintained rigid composures, though their eyes betrayed their shock. "Perhaps explanations are in order," General Marshall said, turning to address the stunned room. "Commander Blackwood has spent the last 6 months identifying a security breach that cost American lives. She personally volunteered to be inserted without rank or privilege to flush out the source." Hayes lunged suddenly toward the exit, shoving Wexler aside with unexpected force. The lieutenant stumbled backward, caught off guard by the desperation in Hayes's movements. Several officers reached instinctively for weapons they weren't carrying in the secure briefing area. Reverie's response was immediate and practiced, a quick hand signal to the security team positioned outside the glass doors. Before Hayes could reach the corridor, 2 Special Forces operators stepped into view, weapons ready. Their appearance was so synchronized with Reverie's signal that it was clear they'd been waiting for her command all along. "That won't be necessary, Major," Reverie said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Security protocols were activated the moment General Marshall entered the building. There's nowhere to go." Hayes froze, calculating his options. His hand slowly emerged from his jacket, empty. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies or escape routes, finding neither. "Stand down, Major," General Marshall ordered. "You're only making this worse for yourself." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath as Hayes considered his options. The Special Forces operators moved closer, their focus unwavering. Finally, Hayes' shoulders slumped in defeat. Reverie removed her glasses, standing taller as she shrugged off the physical mannerisms of her cover identity. She reached up and pulled the clip from her hair, letting it fall to her shoulders in a way that instantly transformed her appearance. Gone was the deliberately forgettable administrative assistant. In her place stood a commanding officer with unmistakable authority. She opened her desk drawer, removing a combat knife and badge that had been hidden beneath stacks of papers for 6 months. The knife, a specialized tactical model issued only to elite special operations units, she secured at her belt. The badge she held briefly, running her thumb over the embossed emblem before securing it to her blazer. "Commander Blackwood," General Marshall continued, "led one of our most effective special intelligence units in Syria until 3 months ago, when a compromised operation resulted in casualties. Evidence suggested the breach originated from within this division." Senior Analyst Braddock stepped forward, his face ashen. "Sir, I had no idea that our division was—" "Not the entire division, Analyst Braddock," Marshall interrupted. "Just one individual who systematically compromised operations through unauthorized access and transmission of classified intelligence." All eyes turned to Hayes, who had been subtly backing toward the conference room where a second exit waited. Commander Farrow watched his colleague with growing horror, beginning to understand the implications of what he was witnessing. "Delta Team, secure the subject," Reverie ordered into her comm device, revealing that she had been in constant communication with an external team all along. 2 more operators appeared behind Hayes, effectively cutting off his retreat. Their appearance from seemingly nowhere demonstrated the precision planning behind this operation. As security personnel moved to restrain him, Hayes suddenly addressed the room. "This is absurd. I've served this country for 15 years. Whatever evidence she claims to have is fabricated." His voice carried a desperate edge that undermined his protests. Several officers exchanged glances, recognizing the tone of a cornered man. "Commander Blackwood has been a ghost for the past 6 months. Hayes continued. "None of you even knew who she was, and now you're taking her word over a decorated officer? This is a setup." Reverie merely nodded to one of Marshall's aides, who activated the main display screen. Security footage appeared, showing Hayes accessing restricted systems after hours, his face clearly visible. Another clip showed him meeting with the foreign operative in the parking garage, the exchange of documents unmistakable. A third segment displayed Hayes transmitting classified information through unauthorized channels, carefully disguised but clearly identifiable through Reveries' surveillance. The evidence was gathered meticulously over 6 months, Reverie said, her voice calm but cold. Every unauthorized access, every transmission, every meeting with foreign assets, all documented and verified through multiple sources. She stepped forward, commanding the room's attention without raising her voice, a skill that separated natural leaders from those who relied on rank alone. Major Hayes compromised Operation Shadowfall by altering intelligence about target locations and security protocols. He systematically undermined counterterrorism operations to serve foreign interests, resulting in the deaths of American operatives and the failure of critical missions. The evidence continued playing across the screens, damning and irrefutable. Hayes watched the footage, his defiance crumbling with each new revelation. "We have confirmed financial transactions linking Hayes to foreign intelligence services," General Marshall added. "Multiple accounts across 3 countries, all receiving substantial deposits following compromised operations." Lieutenant Jenkins gasped audibly. She had worked directly with Hayes on several Syrian intelligence assessments, unwittingly contributing to compromised operations. As security personnel secured Hayes in handcuffs, Reverie approached him slowly, stopping just close enough for him to see the dangerous intensity in her eyes. The room fell silent, sensing the personal nature of this confrontation. "The operatives in Damascus were my team, my family," she said quietly, though everyone in the now silent room could hear her. 6 people who trusted that their intelligence was secure, who believed their mission parameters were uncorrupted. Her control was absolute, her voice never rising, yet every word carried the weight of restrained fury. Those watching recognized the discipline of an officer who had mastered her emotions without denying them. "They walked into a trap because of intelligence you deliberately altered. Their deaths weren't casualties of war, they were murders by proxy." Hayes met her gaze, his defiance crumbling. Something in Reverie's eyes, perhaps the absolute certainty of his guilt, perhaps the controlled intensity of her anger, seemed to finally break through his denials. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Blackwood," he said, lowering his voice. "This goes higher than you think. I'm not the only one." "We'll find out," she replied. "You'll have plenty of time to explain your network during interrogation." She stepped back, maintaining professional distance despite the personal nature of his betrayal. "Each of your transmissions has been traced, each contact identified. The operation to dismantle your network began the moment General Marshall entered this room." Hayes's eyes widened at the implication. While all attention had been focused on this confrontation, other teams were already moving against his associates. "Take him," Reverie ordered. The Special Forces operators moved forward, escorting Hayes from the room with efficient professionalism. As Hayes was led away, the division remained silent, processing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. For months, a traitor had worked. Among them, and only the woman they had dismissed as insignificant had seen it. General Marshall addressed the division again. Commander Blackwood sacrificed her identity, her rank, and her dignity to protect this nation's intelligence integrity. For 6 months, she worked among you, invisible by design, gathering evidence while enduring dismissal and disrespect. The officers and analysts shifted uncomfortably, many unable to meet Reverie's eyes as they recalled their treatment of the woman they had called Paperwork Girl. Lieutenant Wexler stared at the floor, remembering the coffee he had spilled across her documents without a proper apology. Commander Farrow recalled the numerous times he had claimed her work as his own. Her mission required complete anonymity, Marshall continued. Any hint of her true identity or purpose would have compromised the operation and cost more lives. Remember that the next time you encounter someone whose role you don't understand or whose contributions seem insignificant. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Intelligence work isn't always about who speaks the loudest in briefings or who has the most impressive title. Sometimes it's about who notices what others miss, who asks questions others avoid, who sees patterns in what appears to be random. Senior Analyst Braddock approached Reverie, his usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. "Commander, I never knew. I assigned you to filing and cleanup duties. I dismissed your intelligence assessments because of your apparent position." "That was the point, Analyst Braddock," Reverie replied evenly. "The best operations are the ones you never see coming. My role required being underestimated." She didn't offer absolution for his behavior, neither condemning nor excusing it. The lesson itself was more important than individual apologies. Marshall gestured to his aide, who displayed additional evidence on the screens. For those who still don't understand the scope of Major Hayes' betrayal, this may provide context. The screens showed how Hayes had systematically altered critical intelligence about target locations, security protocols, and operational timelines. Satellite imagery that had been subtly modified, threat assessments with key details changed, communications intercepts with crucial information removed. The results were catastrophic, Marshall explained, particularly for the Damascus team 3 months ago. The screen showed satellite imagery of the compound from Hayes' briefing, now revealed as an American safe house that had been attacked after its location was compromised. Footage from before the attack showed 6 operatives entering the building, conducting what they believed was a secure operation. Subsequent imagery showed the precision strike that had destroyed the compound, leaving no survivors. Reverie watched the footage with composed professionalism, though those looking closely might have detected the slight tension in her jaw, the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. These weren't just operatives to her. They were people she had selected, trained, and led. People who had trusted her with their lives. Following this incident, traditional counterintelligence measures proved ineffective, Marshall explained. Hayes was too careful, too methodical in covering his tracks. Conventional surveillance would have been detected immediately. He turned to Reverie with genuine respect. Commander Blackwood proposed an unconventional approach. Despite having just lost her team, despite the personal nature of the betrayal, she recognized that traditional investigation methods would fail against someone as careful as Hayes. Reverie stood straighter, her posture reflecting her actual training and authority rather than the deliberately diminished presence she had maintained for months. She proposed becoming invisible, taking an administrative position that would give her access to all systems while remaining beneath suspicion, Marshall continued. It required setting aside her rank, her authority, and her identity. Few officers would volunteer for such an assignment under any circumstances. Fewer still would propose it immediately after losing their team to a traitor's actions. Lieutenant Wexler approached hesitantly. "Commander Blackwood, I want to apologize for my behavior. The coffee incident, the paperwork girl comments. It was unprofessional and disrespectful." Reverie raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't apologize, Lieutenant. Learn. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one no one bothers to see." Her tone wasn't harsh, but instructive. "Your failure wasn't disrespect. It was poor tactical assessment. You dismissed a potential asset or threat without proper evaluation." She glanced around the room, including all of them in her observation. In intelligence work, perception blinds us to reality more often than any active deception. You saw what you expected to see, an administrative assistant of no significance, because that aligned with your preconceptions. Wexler nodded, chastened but attentive. It was a lesson he wouldn't forget. The same principle allowed Hayes to operate undetected, Reverie continued. You saw a decorated officer with an exemplary record because that's what you expected to see. The contradiction between his record and his actions created a blind spot that he exploited effectively. With Hayes secured and evidence presented, the formal part of the operation concluded. Security footage played on screens around the room, showing how Reverie had methodically documented Hayes' activities while maintaining her cover. Footage showed her working late after others had left, carefully examining access logs that revealed Hayes' unauthorized entries. Other clips showed her placing tracking software that recorded his communications with foreign assets. For 6 months, she had been gathering evidence while being treated as nothing more than office support staff. The room fell silent as officers and analysts processed the implications of their collective blindness. The operation wasn't just about identifying Hayes, General Marshall explained. It was about understanding his methodology, his contacts, and the full scope of compromised intelligence. Commander Blackwood needed to observe him in his natural environment, documenting patterns that would have been disguised had he known he was under surveillance. Additional footage showed Reverie strategically planting misinformation, subtle alterations to intelligence that Hayes subsequently transmitted to his contacts, providing irrefutable proof of his culpability. Security teams will continue processing evidence, Marshall announced. All personnel will submit to interviews regarding potential contact with Major Hayes. Commander Farrow will coordinate with Commander Blackwood to ensure all compromised intelligence is identified and contained. Farrow straightened, clearly uncomfortable with the new power dynamic. This was the same woman whose corrections he had claimed as his own just days ago. Yes, sir. Whatever resources the commander requires. As the initial shock subsided, the room began to function again. Analysts returned to workstations, security personnel established containment protocols, and Marshall's team began collecting additional evidence from Hayes's office and personal devices. Reverie moved through the space with natural authority, no longer constraining herself to the edges of rooms or the shadows of conversations. Officers who had previously ignored her now stood straighter as she passed, offering the respect her rank had always deserved. The transformation was remarkable, not because Reverie had changed, but because their perception of her had. She approached her desk, the place that had been her observation post for half a year, and began collecting the few personal items she had kept there. Most of what appeared personal had been carefully selected props for her cover identity. The family photo on her desk wasn't her family. The coffee mug with a vacation destination wasn't from a place she had visited. Only now did her colleagues realize how little they actually knew about the woman who had worked among them. Commander Farrow approached cautiously. Commander Blackwood, I want to offer my sincere apologies for any professional discourtesies. Had I known your true assignment, you would have treated me differently. Reverie completed his sentence, which is precisely why you couldn't know. My mission required being underestimated and overlooked. Still, Farrow persisted. Taking credit for your intelligence assessments was unprofessional, regardless of your cover status. Reverie considered him for a moment. Yes, it was. And that behavior creates vulnerabilities in your team that enemies will exploit. When you dismiss input based on rank rather than content, you create blind spots in your intelligence assessment. She maintained eye contact, ensuring her message was received. That's something to consider in your leadership role, Commander. Operational security depends on valuing intelligence for its accuracy, not its source. The rebuke was delivered without anger, but with unmistakable clarity. Farrow nodded, accepting the criticism from an officer he now recognized as his superior in both rank and ability. As the morning progressed, Reverie coordinated with Marshall's team to ensure all compromised intelligence was identified. Her familiarity with the systems and operations impressed even veteran analysts, who began to understand that the paperwork girl had actually been the most knowledgeable intelligence officer in the division all along. Commander, how did you maintain your cover so effectively? Lieutenant Jenkins asked as they reviewed potentially compromised files. Even when you corrected critical intelligence errors, you never revealed your expertise. Reverie considered the question. Deep cover requires consistent adherence to your established persona. I presented corrections as questions rather than assertions. Could this satellite imagery be from a different time frame? Sounds less authoritative than, this intelligence assessment is incorrect. She demonstrated the difference in tone and posture, showing how she had deliberately diminished her presence. Physical mannerisms reinforce perception. I maintain specific behaviors that register as subordinate or non-threatening. Lowered gaze, slightly hunched shoulders, quieter voice, hesitant speech patterns. Several analysts watched in fascination as Reverie shifted between her cover persona and her actual command presence, the transformation so complete that they might have been different people. Most importantly, she continued, I allowed myself to be dismissed. When Farrow claimed my work, when Wexler spilled coffee on my documents, when Braddock assigned me menial tasks, I accepted these indignities because they reinforced my cover. The more invisible I became, the more effectively I could observe Hayes's activities. At her request, the division assembled again at 1100 hours. This time, Reverie stood at the front of the room, no longer invisible. She had changed into her formal military uniform, complete with the insignia of her rank and the combat decorations she had earned over years of service. The transformation was striking. The same woman who had blended into the background now commanded the room's complete attention. The uniform itself told a story for those who could read military decorations. Multiple combat deployment insignia, special operations qualification badges, commendations for valor under fire. The evidence of a distinguished career that had been deliberately hidden beneath a forgettable blazer and administrative title. For the past 6 months, I've observed this division's operations from a unique perspective. She began. I've seen both strengths and vulnerabilities. Hayes was able to operate undetected, not just because of his own skills, but because of structural weaknesses in how information flows through this unit. The room listened with rapt attention as Reverie outlined security vulnerabilities she had identified, not to shame, but to strengthen the division against future threats. Hierarchy has value in military operations, she continued, but when it prevents information from flowing upward, it creates blind spots that adversaries exploit. Hayes counted on the fact that no one would listen to concerns raised by administrative staff. He was right. She paced slowly across the front of the room, her movements deliberate and measured. When analyst Jenkins questioned discrepancies in Syrian intelligence last month, Hayes dismissed her concerns because of her junior status. When Lieutenant Wexler identified inconsistencies in field reports from Kurdistan, Hayes redirected him to less sensitive operations. Jenkins and Wexler exchanged surprised glances, neither aware that Reverie had noticed these interactions. These weren't random incidents, Reverie explained. They were deliberate efforts to isolate anyone who might detect Hayes's activities. He systematically created an environment where questioning superiors was discouraged, and highlighting discrepancies was seen as undermining team cohesion. Analysts and officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing the truth in her assessment. The cultural weaknesses she identified were real and had contributed to Hayes's ability to operate undetected. Moving forward, new protocols will be implemented, Reverie explained. All intelligence assessments will undergo blind review, evaluated on content rather than the rank of the person submitting them. Security access will be compartmentalized and regularly audited, and most importantly, the division will institute regular role reversal exercises, where senior officers temporarily work from different positions within the unit. She paused, allowing her gaze to move across the assembled personnel. Had anyone in this room spent a single day doing what I did for 6 months, Hayes would have been identified much sooner. Perspective matters in intelligence work. As she concluded the briefing, a photo appeared on the main screen. Reverie with her team in Syria, all in combat gear, standing together before a mission. Unlike the carefully staged prop photos on her administrative desk, this image showed the real Reverie Blackwood, a commander respected by her team, positioned centrally in the group, their body language revealing absolute trust in her leadership. 3 of the faces were now marked with small black stars, indicating those lost in the compromised operation. The room fell silent as they studied the image, finally understanding the personal cost behind Reverie's mission. Intelligence isn't just information, Reverie said quietly. It's people's lives. Every report you file, every assessment you make, every security protocol you follow or ignore, these decisions have consequences beyond this building. Remember that. The room remained silent as the image lingered on screen. The abstract concept of intelligence failures had become viscerally human. Before their final mission, my team received intelligence that had been altered by Major Hayes. Reverie continued. Extraction routes were compromised. Safe houses were identified as hostile locations. Communication channels were monitored by enemy forces. She maintained perfect composure, though the cost of that control was evident to those who looked closely enough. They walked into a perfect trap, believing they had accurate intelligence. Their deaths were not the result of operational risk or enemy capability. They died because someone within our own system betrayed them. The silence deepened as her words sank in. For many in the room, Hayes's betrayal had been abstract until this moment, a violation of protocols and procedures. Now they understood it as Reverie did, as the deliberate sacrifice of American lives. This is why security protocols exist, she concluded. This is why we verify intelligence through multiple sources. This is why questioning anomalies matters more than respecting rank. Because when we fail at these fundamentals, people die. General Marshall stepped forward. Commander Blackwood's full mission report will inform significant changes to counterintelligence protocols throughout the intelligence community. Her work here has likely saved countless lives and operations. He turned to Reverie. Your new assignment awaits, Commander, unless you'd prefer to stay here. A small, wry smile crossed her face. I think I've done enough paperwork, sir. The comment broke the tension in the room, eliciting nervous laughter from several officers who just days ago had piled their unwanted tasks on her desk. As the briefing concluded, personnel filed out with a new awareness of the woman who had worked silently among them. Lieutenant Wexler lingered, clearly struggling with what to say. "Commander," he finally managed, "I just wanted to say, I never would have volunteered for what you did. To set aside your rank, to be treated the way we treated you, just to complete the mission. That takes a different kind of courage than what they teach us at the academy." Reverie considered him thoughtfully. "The uniform doesn't make the soldier, Lieutenant. Neither does the rank. Remember that when you're evaluating both allies and adversaries." "Yes, ma'am," Wexler nodded earnestly. "If I could ask one question, how did you maintain your cover so perfectly? Even when we were disrespectful, you never broke character." "Mission focus," Reverie replied simply. "Every time you called me paperwork girl, every time Pharaoh took credit for my work, every time Braddock assigned me to clean up coffee stains, those moments confirmed that my cover was effective. Your dismissal was my operational success." Wexler absorbed this perspective with growing understanding. "I'll remember that, Commander." "See that you do," she replied. "Intelligence work requires seeing beyond surface appearances. The next time you encounter someone who seems insignificant, ask yourself what you might be missing." As the division returned to its duties, now under temporary command while a full security audit was conducted, Reverie completed her final preparations to depart. She collected her actual personal effects, secured remaining evidence, and briefed Marshall's team on ongoing surveillance requirements. Lieutenant Jenkins approached as Reverie was preparing to leave. "Commander, I just wanted to say, when I questioned those Syrian intelligence reports last month, I thought I was going crazy when Hayes dismissed my concerns. Thank you for validating that my instincts were correct." Reverie nodded. "Trust those instincts, Lieutenant. Intelligence analysis is as much art as science. When something feels wrong, it usually is, even if you can't immediately identify why." "Will we be informed about the full extent of the compromise?" Jenkins asked. "You'll receive the information relevant to your operational security," Reverie replied. "Some details will remain classified, but you'll know enough to prevent similar vulnerabilities in the future." In the early afternoon, she stood in the office one last time, now dressed in her full military uniform, with commander's insignia visible on her shoulders. The same space that had been her silent observation post for months now felt entirely different, not because the room had changed, but because perceptions had. Braddock approached with a file in hand. "Your complete personnel record, Commander. All evidence of your cover assignment has been removed and your actual service record reinstated." "Thank you, Analyst Braddock," she replied, accepting the file. "If I may ask," he said hesitantly, "how did you do it? Day after day being treated as, well, as less than you are. I'm not sure I could have maintained that cover for so long." Reverie considered the question seriously. When you truly understand your mission's importance, ego becomes irrelevant. "I wasn't here to be respected or acknowledged. I was here to prevent more deaths like those of my team in Damascus." She glanced around the office. "Besides, there's valuable intelligence to be gained when people don't think you're listening or watching. I learned more about this division's operations by being invisible than I ever would have as a visiting commander." Braddock nodded slowly. "We'll be implementing your recommendations immediately. The division will be stronger for your time here, however unknowing we were. Intelligence failures are rarely about individual incompetence," Reverie said. "They're systemic, the result of cultural and procedural weaknesses that develop over time. Hayes exploited those weaknesses, but he didn't create them." Braddock accepted the assessment with professional grace. "Then we'll address the systems, not just the individual betrayal." As Reverie prepared to leave, General Marshall returned with final orders. "The intelligence you gathered extends beyond Hayes. We've identified 3 additional contacts in other divisions who require similar surveillance." "Similar methods?" Reverie asked. Marshall shook his head. "No, after today your face is known. But the operation design was sound. We'll need your expertise to train other officers for deep cover assignments." Reverie considered the implications. "The psychological profile will be critical. Not everyone can set aside their identity for months at a time without compromising the mission." "Precisely why we need your input," Marshall agreed. "This operation demonstrated that internal threats require unconventional counterintelligence approaches. Your methodology will become the template for future operations. A military transport awaited outside to take Reverie to her next assignment. As she walked through the office toward the exit, the division stood at attention, a show of respect that would have been unimaginable just hours earlier. The same people who had walked past her without acknowledgement now stood straight, eyes forward, honoring her departure. The transformation wasn't in Reverie, she had always been this officer, but in their perception of her. The invisible woman had finally been seen. At the door, she paused and looked back at the room that had dismissed her for so long. The desk where she had been invisible now stood empty, but her influence would remain long after her departure. "The best defense isn't always strength or speed," she said to the assembled personnel. "Sometimes it's patience." Her eyes found Lieutenant Wexler, who had perhaps learned the most valuable lesson of all. "Remember that, Lieutenant. The quietest person in the room might be the one you should fear most." With those words, Commander Reverie Blackwood stepped out of the Intelligence Analysis Division for the final time. Through the windows, analysts and officers watched as she approached the waiting transport, her posture revealing the combat-ready officer she had always been. Inside the vehicle, Marshall handed her a tablet displaying her new assignment details. Ready to build a team again? For the first time since losing her operatives in Damascus, Reverie felt the weight of command settling back onto her shoulders where it belonged. The months of invisibility had served their purpose. Justice had been achieved for her fallen team members. Security had been restored to critical intelligence operations. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I'm ready." The vehicle pulled away from the Pentagon, carrying Commander Blackwood toward her next mission. Behind her, the Intelligence Analysis Division would never be the same. Her presence, first invisible, then unmistakable, had transformed not just their security protocols, but their fundamental understanding of perception and power. Lieutenant Jenkins returned to her workstation, now looking at intelligence reports with new awareness of subtle discrepancies that might indicate manipulation. Commander Farrow reviewed his leadership approach, recognizing how his dismissal of junior analysts had created vulnerabilities that Hayes had exploited. Analyst Braddock began implementing Reverie's recommended security protocols, starting with blind review of intelligence assessments. And Lieutenant Wexler, perhaps affected most profoundly by the day's revelations, approached his desk to find a small note where Reverie had left it, a simple message that would guide the remainder of his career. Always look for what others miss. He carefully placed the note in his pocket, then turned his attention to the Kurdish intelligence reports with new perspective and purpose. The analyst who had mockingly called Reverie paperwork girl now understood that true authority came not from title or rank, but from competence and character, qualities that Commander Blackwood had demonstrated in silence for 6 months. Meanwhile, in the transport heading toward her next assignment, Commander Reverie Blackwood reviewed the details of the operation ahead. The mission would be different. The challenges new, but the core principle remained the same, protecting the intelligence that safeguarded American lives and interests. As the vehicle moved through Washington traffic, she allowed herself one brief moment of satisfaction. For 6 months, she had endured dismissal and disrespect, all while methodically building the case that would bring down a traitor. The mission had required her to become invisible, to swallow her pride, to accept being underestimated and overlooked. But in that moment, when General Marshall had stood before her desk and snapped a crisp salute, the months of patience had crystallized into perfect vindication. Not for her ego, Commander Blackwood had never needed external validation of her worth, but for the mission itself, and for the memory of her fallen team members. Justice had been served, the division had learned its lesson, and Reverie Blackwood had once again proven that true strength often lies not in demanding respect, but in knowing your value even when others fail to see it. The photograph of her team in Damascus remained in her pocket, not as a reminder of failure, but as motivation for the mission ahead. Their sacrifice had exposed a vulnerability that she had now addressed. Their memory would continue to drive her forward, ensuring that their deaths served a purpose beyond the immediate tragedy. Through the transport window, the Pentagon faded from view as Reverie turned her focus fully toward the mission ahead. The chapter of being paperwork girl had served its purpose. Commander Blackwood had work to do. Have you ever been in a situation where people underestimated your abilities or overlooked your contributions? How did you handle it? And did you ever experience that moment of recognition Reverie felt when the general saluted her? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes our greatest power comes not from demanding attention, but from quietly knowing our worth, while others discover it in their own time. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength and unexpected revelations.